and welcome to Beebe Book Buzz. My name is Karen Stern, and I'm here with my colleagues Casey Chwico and Jacqueline Powers, and we're here, as we always are, to tell you about the books we've been reading recently in order to help you find your next great read. We have Casey here with us for the first time, which is exciting because she is our head youth librarian, and so she's going to be sharing some things, I think, for a bunch of different ages, right, today?
Yep.
And so we're going to let her finish off today. I'm going to start, and with a fiction, a new debut, actually, which I love because it had some kind of fresh perspectives, at least for me. This is called Groundskeeping by Lee Cole, and when I say fresh perspectives, he's a young millennial white male, which might not seem that fresh, but he's writing a relationship story, which is a little different. He's also from rural Kentucky. Lee Cole is the author, as well as writing about rural Kentucky. And I think I'm pretty safe in suggesting that, you know, the publishing industry does not often turn out a lot of authors from the middle of the country. They tend to be more from the coasts. So all of that was kind of different and interesting to me, not an author profile that you see all that much. On top of it, I liked it because it is, as I said, a relationship story. It's both a love story and it's a family story, and he does both really well. There are other layers to it, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but I'll give you the basics first in terms of what, you know, who we're talking about here. So the main character is Owen Callahan, and he is also our first-person narrator. And he is also, like Lee Cole, he's from rural Kentucky. He lives, we're set mostly in Louisville. And he's always dreamed of being a writer from the time he was little. But he's also always dreamed about being somewhere other than Kentucky. So he has actually lived outside Kentucky, but he has come back, and he is working as a groundskeeper, which is where the title comes from, at a rural college, like a kind of fancy liberal arts college in Louisville, where he meets and falls for Alma. She is a Princeton-educated writer. She's already gained some fame. She's doing a residency here. And she, I guess you would call her, well, let's start with the other relationships in the book first. So he lives with his grandfather in their rural family home, Pop, and Pop is one of my favorite characters in the book. He's awesome. And he also lives with his slightly angry, lonely Uncle Court, and there we get some of the political divides coming in, because Owen has, as I said, he's left, he's gotten away, he's moved on in certain ways, and some of his family have not. And when Owen meets Alma it's 2016, so it's just before the presidential election. And therefore, through these relationships, he's diving into some of those political divides that we know today. And you know, you could say he's not making big political statements on one side or the other. He's showing you all this stuff from the inside, right? He looks, for instance, Alma's somebody who his family would describe as a coastal elite, right? She went to Princeton, but her family are also Bosnian Muslim refugees, right? They came when she was a child, and so they came with pretty much nothing. But at the same time, her parents are a doctor and a dentist, and you know, she's been groomed to go to these elite schools. So there's that, and then there's the family portraits, which we also get. We get his mother and her new husband, who are evangelical Christians, and his father and his second wife, and her, Alma's parents as well. So we get all this, we sort of meet all these people, and we see and he plays out, the political stuff plays out in the kind of minutia of these moments when they meet each other. He does it really well. He doesn't pull punches. He's also very even-handed. It's not, you know, he's not coming down hard on one side or the other. So in all of it, what we see is Owen and his conflict between the Kentucky that he has been struggling to get away from for so long, and the one that is wrapped up in a lot of nostalgia for him in his past. So there's this feeling of like home is definitely a very big theme of this book. Like, what does it mean to find home, you know?
To be from somewhere.
To be from
yeah.
somewhere. Also, can you find, is home in a relationship? You know, you can see him looking for it in his relationship with Amma, and how much do you have to be at home with yourself before you can find home? So that's one thing. And I think the other twist to this book is that the main characters are both writers, right? So you have a writer writing about characters who's writing, which can't help but turn into metafiction, because the book unfolds literally as the author is taking notes on the stuff that you're reading about as you're holding the book. So it's like this kind of, so he's like, he's like talking about, he's having the conversation with Alma, and then he's taking notes on it afterwards, and then that's what the conversation that you just read about in the book. So it's like funhouse mirrors, and you get the feeling that he's messing with you a little bit, going like, so what do you think is true here? And does it matter? And how much does truth matter?
How much do you think of this as autobiographical in any
Well,
way?
that is exactly what he's playing with. And
he wants you to wonder
Yes,
how much.
he wants you to wonder, and he wants you to think about fiction and its role in that. And you know, I looked at some interviews with him, and he says it's not, you know, but of course it is. But it has to be.
I'll say there
It
has to be an element of it.
Has to
Yeah.
be, has to
I
be.
mean, at least the experiences of.
Yeah, but he's just daring you to think about that question all the way through, which is, again, another cool layer to this book. One thing you do know is true, though, is his depiction of Kentucky, both the landscape and just the kind of societal aspects of it. You know, he writes about this rural, working poor setting really well, and it's beautifully done. So that you're very grounded, and most of the action of the book takes place in Kentucky. He goes to see her parents in D.C. once, but basically he's right there. And so you've got these many layers, the personal, the political, the artistic, all kind of woven through the book, and all set very firmly in modern day Kentucky. So it's not full of action. It's definitely, you know, it's a story of the mind and the heart. And it made me smile. It made me cry at least twice, which is saying a lot. I don't cry in books. It did.
And twice.
And then there was the ending. So I'll leave you to find out about that yourself.
How long does it cover? Like, how much time does it cover?
It covers really, I think it's about a year. No, is it?
But not like.
It's not
not like one of those
you get
growing
no,
up
it's
stories,
not a growing up. It's not a coming of age story in that sense at all. Although he is, you know, obviously learning a lot of lessons about himself. But it's just really well done and really accessible. It's not, you know, even though what we're dealing with here is essentially literary fiction, it doesn't feel literary. It feels like people talking to each other, and he does. I was surprised at, you know, how much this one got me. So, Groundskeeping by Lee Cole. So Jackie's going to hit us with nonfiction.
Nonfiction, and I felt like we've plunged like right into fall, basically winter, from this like broiling summer.
It's so true.
And
Yeah,
now it's
definitely.
dark all the time. And so this book felt right to me to talk about now. It's Catherine May's book, Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. It is actually from 2020. It's a few years old. I think it came out right before the pandemic, so
Oh, wow.
it got real lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because I wonder what her experience of this would be after we all kind of did this,
Really, right.
collectively. But anyway, so she is British. She lives by the sea in Whitstable.
No way, Whitstable. I know Whitstable well.
She lives in Whitstable with her husband and her young son. And I think they take the period she's talking about here is, I want to say like 2018-ish, late 2018. But she is a writer. She has written some fiction. She's written some nonfiction. She is, at the beginning of the book, a university lecturer. And she is like basically leaving her job. She's going out on sick leave knowing that she's not coming back. She kind of alludes to it, and she kind of implies that the university knows. But anyway, she defines this cold season, this winter as not just the cold season that we're used to, but this sort of fallow period where you're kind of cut off from the world, you feel a little sidelined, you're not going out, you're not really making progress, you're sort of just turning inward. And then the book is really about her kind of personal winter, which was a period when she just really felt kind of low, kind of overwhelmed, just sort of out of sync with everything around her. And it's not new, this feeling isn't new to her. She has had mental health issues for much of her life. She was diagnosed, I think, in her late teens as having Asperger's. And so she's kind of spent a lot of her life kind of feeling like she's in this sort of outside place. So the book is really her kind of trying to share how she has coped with these times and what she does to sort of, and instead of just sort of powering through them, kind of leading into them a little bit more.
Okay.
So this particular winter for her starts at the end of the summer, I want to say in September. Her husband, they're on vacation, her husband is complaining of a stomach ache and she's kind of dismissive of it. And it turns out it's his appendix. Oh. And so it ends up being bad. He's I think it ruptures while he's waiting. And it sounds like, she doesn't get into a lot of the details, but I think he gets sepsis or something. There's some kind of additional scary situation. So that happens. She ends up being ill herself in this kind of, I found this out afterwards, she doesn't actually ever tell you what happened. She was later diagnosed with Crohn's disease, but it took a long time and a lot of tests, months of kind of not really knowing what was going on, and they finally gave her this diagnosis. So that's kind of part of it. And then she gets the diagnosis, and then her son ends up having trouble at school. He's 6. It sounds, she doesn't really elaborate. It sounds like he was perhaps bullied or something. So she ends up just taking him out of school. So she basically does just retreat from the world. And the book is actually really beautiful. It's kind of about her sort of having the time and space to see things a little bit more clearly. There's a lot of talk about nature. There's a lot of talk about how animals and insects deal with winter, how they get through it, their coping mechanisms. She talks about other cultures that are kind of professional winterers, like the Norwegians and people who just this is their world. And they have saunas, and does that work? She starts with a friend doing those polar plunge type things where she does a cold swim in the ocean every day, which sounds awful to me. But she's a beautiful writer. Her writing, it's very elegant, it's very kind of quiet. There's this kind of feeling through the whole book of that quiet when it snows, when it's like a hush and everything's just sort of softened. That's how she writes. And some of it is sort of nonlinear. She actually talks about time before she was pregnant with her son, when they had a trip planned to Iceland and they ended up going anyway. And it was harder for her because she was quite pregnant, and it was very cold, and the coats didn't fit. But she describes, the Northern Lights and things like that. Really, really beautiful things. It's a very, it's just her. She's very elegant. It's not flowery. It's kind of even a little bit spare, but she really kind of cuts right to the heart of that feeling of cold and that biting, crisp air and all that, and how that makes her feel, and how that gets her, how she's able to appreciate it in the place that she's at in her life. So she doesn't actually enjoy any of this, though. It's kind of throughout the whole thing, she's not saying that this was a good time. I think it was very hard for her. She is sort of depressed. She's, not feeling well at a lot of it. She's having a hard, she's kind of entertaining her 6-year-old because she just pulled him out of school and was we'll deal with it later. And so it's hard to kind of, it's not like it was a vacation for her. It was still not easy. I do want to note, because this is what struck me, and it was funny when I read the actual critical reviews of it in newspapers, nobody touches on this, but when you read the Goodreads reviews, everybody's all over it. She doesn't really acknowledge how privileged she is to be able to just walk away from the world like that.
Just
a lot of people could not, because some of her suggestions are sort of let your free time expand, get enough sleep. And it's like, that sounds lovely. Yeah. Like,
if only.
you know, a lot of people would not have the space to do that for a weekend, never mind like months on end.
Right.
There's a little nod at the end to the fact that money might be an issue, and she has to give up this space that she writes in like a barn or something somewhere because she can't justify the cost because she's not working. And she kind of alludes to like worrying about money, but there's really no acknowledgement that most people can't do this.
Right. But is she asking you to like to take away the concepts?
I think that's. I mean,
apply them as best
I
you
think
can.
that's what you can take away with it,
take
like
the bits and pieces.
The bits
you
and
can.
pieces.
Yeah.
Like maybe you just let your free time expand by not playing on your phone for a weekend or for a Saturday or something, or like kind of going out into nature, appreciating it. I think there are, the message is really that we have to all kind of take care of ourselves. And you can take care of other people better when you take care of yourself. And what does that mean? It means maybe you lean into this period for yourself,
right,
in whatever way that works for you, however that manifests itself in your current situation, instead of doing what a lot of us do, like what I would do, is just like power through and just suck it up.
Keep right on going.
Yeah, that whole idea of sucking it up is a big one in our culture.
Well, and it's kind of funny because it's a very British, like, stiff upper lip,
right,
to kind of do that.
And that's probably, again, she's writing in that.
Right,
culture.
and so a lot of that was, like I said, the reviews and like the journals and things they were just like, it's lovely. And then the people were like, yeah, but you can't really like, most people can't do this.
Right.
But I think it's still worth a read just for her writing, just for the kind of nature parts and the sort of the takeaway that there might be pieces of this that you could apply that would make things a little bit easier. It's a very gentle kind of book.
But it's even giving yourself that permission, right?
It's permission.
It's saying, if you're in a tough spot, let yourself be there.
be.
It's okay. Like, don't try to block it out or put blinders on or whatever it is. Yeah, sit with it.
Yeah. So I do think
Make
it
an
was still
attempt.
worth the read. Whether I don't think you should take it as prescriptive.
Right. There you go. That's
So
it.
that was Wintering, as we head into winter.
And her name is
Catherine May.
May.
Catherine May.
Got it. Great. All
Okay.
right.
So
We're going to go in a different direction.
Yes, very different direction. And as Kara had alluded to, the part of what mine is that there's, as I brought a picture book as well, is that this covers pretty much all the age ranges. So I'm coming at you with some classic style science fiction with a Star Wars book. So this is shortly after the original. No, the title. I know the title's on the spine. I am such a Star Wars nerd that I got the fancy cover. This is my personal copy. I got the fancy cover. So, but basically, since the original Star Wars movies, they've had a publishing wing that they've released books. And when Disney took over, they decided to keep doing it and actually expand it so that there were more books for like kids. And so one of the things that they've done is, and this is the first book in the series, it's called Star Wars: The High Republic. And this one is this particular one, called The Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule, is the very first one. It is for adults, but if you've ever seen anything Star Wars, you're not going to be surprised that like it's a very appropriate read for teens, even a lot of like middle school, and like even like once you can actually physically read it, there's like nothing really in here that's offensive. Like, I was reading Star Wars books when I was 8, 9, 10, adult Star Wars books. But one of the really cool things that they're doing with this like whole initiative with the High Republic is it's basically it started out with 5 authors who were doing all the different stuff, and they were people who'd written for kids, young adults, comics, and so basically there are picture books. So this picture book, which is called The Great Jedi Rescue, also by Charles Soule, because it is literally the first part of this book in picture book, like in a shortened picture book format, which is really cool. And so basically, they're all interconnected, but you can also kind of read each age group by itself. And then there's also 2 levels of comics. There's adult comics, and there's also kid comics for it.
Okay.
And there's going to be 2 their upcoming TV shows. There's an animated one for kids that's literally called like High Republic Adventures that's coming in the spring. And then there's a live action show coming at some point. They've started to cast people called The Acolyte that are both also going to be set in this time period.
Right.
And basically these books are about 200 years before the earliest movie, so before The Phantom Menace and the prequels. So basically what they're doing with this is they're telling the story of the Jedi Order when it was at its peak.
Okay.
Like when it was like the really like best part, but also how things started the way they were to end up at the point you're at
So an
with
origin,
the first
kind of an
movie.
origin
So it's
story.
kind of an origin story. And they've broken it down into phases. So this is the first book of phase 1. And basically what Light of the Jedi starts with is a massive disaster when a ship literally disintegrates in hyperspace, which is like just, for those of you not familiar with Star Wars, you're moving really, really, really fast. So when you disintegrate going that fast, pieces go everywhere. And the problem is, of course, many of these pieces head towards planets that have beings on them. So the Jedi, who are much more numerous at this point in time and spread out all over the galaxy in a way they aren't later, rush to help with the disaster. And they do manage to, mostly. There's definitely some casualties, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But, and after they finish, like, the main planet, they find out that because of the way weird space-time things work, it continues to like pop pieces out at random intervals at random planets for like months afterwards. So they're constantly trying to figure out like an algorithm basically to how do we know where these things are coming. So the entire first half of the book is kind of that immediate disaster, which includes a time countdown. So as you're getting to each chapter, it's like this many hours till impact, and you're like, oh my God, it's going to actually hit. So you're definitely, it's a page turner trying to figure out like what's going on.
Right.
So like a sci-fi thriller?
Yeah, it's definitely, and yeah, it's definitely got like.
And are they building characters in all this?
They are building characters.
That are going to take you.
The characters kind of cross over from books to books, but they also, like the adult books, and also depending on the author. So like the books that Charles Soule's writes tend to focus on the ones he's created.
Right.
But you do get a lot of mix in between. I'm actually reading one of the other adult books that comes a little later in the phase right now, and that's by one of the other authors, and she's pulling in some of the characters she'd written a young adult for into the adult books.
Right.
So you do have
Wow.
the cross. There's not a lot of characters in common with the Star Wars, except Yoda. Yoda does appear
Right.
in some of these books.
Yoda's the only one I know.
Yes, and he's very, very old, so he's alive 200 years before.
Right.
And so as they're kind of wrapping up that, they come face to face with a kind of a new threat, or they're starting to kind of figure out maybe it's the same threat, maybe that's why the ship disintegrated, and it's this very wild, out on the edge of space group of pirates. Who basically, they just want the outer parts of the galaxy to themselves. They don't want the Republic to come out and like give order and law to the world. But their leader is one of those people who has a lot more in his back pocket than he's letting anyone else in on. And he wants the Jedi gone. Like he just wants to wipe them off the face of the galaxy.
Which we know doesn't pan out.
No,
Well,
yet.
not yet. Yeah.
And so I will just give a warning, is that if you're one of those people that doesn't like books that will kill characters you like,
Oh.
I will say that like they're not afraid to kill characters. But I'm going to say that for me personally, I find these deaths more impactful and better done than some of, say, George R. R.
I
Martin's.
was just going to say Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Game of Thrones deaths.
Well, because you're more attached to them? Is that
It's
that
not even,
why?
Or
it's
you're
honestly
less.
that you're a little less attached.
You're
Like
less
you know
attached.
them, but it's more characters that you know from like a point of view character. It's like, for example, there's one point of view character you meet in this one, although you see him more in some of the other books, but he's like one of the Jedi learners, and his like everybody's like, oh my God, his master's the best person in the world, and she's going to take over this, and she's going to do this, and then you don't really see much of her.
Personally.
Personally.
Do you not hear anything from her perspective?
Only a little bit.
Okay.
So so it's like it hits, but it's done in an impactful way without making you cry. Like I didn't feel like I needed to cry, but you're like you feel the loss of these characters kind of to the galaxy as a whole.
Right.
Like they give you enough to know. And then so they're doing it in phases. So they finished phase 1, and actually I was when I wrote this, I was like, phase 2 is starting soon. Phase 2 started Tuesday. The first book in phase 2 released on Tuesday. So they released them kind of in little groups and then in like waves. And actually, one of the cool things, and I don't know how it's going to pan out, I'm really curious myself because I'm not quite caught up on phase 1, but phase 2 jumps back another 150 years.
Oh, wow.
To kind of explain some of the things that come up in this one. And then who knows, there's going to be a phase 3, but no one knows yet.
It takes
what.
It takes world building to this whole new
Whole
level.
other
When
level.
you're
that
working.
Was why it was really cool that that's why they originally hired 5 authors to do it. And they basically gave them like 2 years with guidance from like Lucasfilm and stuff and Disney to develop all this with the general guidelines. And now for phase 2, they've brought a couple more authors in.
So did they work like all of the Star Wars universe into this, like in the same way the Marvel universe is doing things?
There's definitely some callbacks and references.
Because like
and things.
Andor is like the newest one, and that's somewhere closer to the time of the original movies.
Yes. So you get in the same way that like the TV shows and stuff are doing is they're really good about the Easter eggs and plugging stuff in.
Right.
And they'll reference things. And there's been stuff that they'll mention in here. There's some disconnect between TV and the books because they're so big and trying to keep a continuity across everything.
I was going to say it would be crazy.
Really. I mean, they have people hired to do that, but still, it's such a big.
Right.
But they do try and drop things. Things that happen in here are mentioned in like some of the other new books that have come out, and and planets that have been mentioned previously are used in here, and maybe an origin story of that planet and the people from it. So they are doing a really good job. It still feels very Star Wars-y, while also feeling very different at the same time, because it is a very different galaxy you find yourself in than when the movies start and everything we've gotten in media, visual media.
Right. Huh. It's kind of an amazing undertaking.
Yeah.
It is very ambitious, but it's paying off. It's really, really good.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
It would be terrible if it wasn't good.
Yes, no. I was a little apprehensive, although the authors that they picked, the ones at least that I knew before this, I was like, okay, these guys are, and they picked a lot of people who had previously published in multiple age brackets, so that it makes it a little bit easier on them. But
so it's kind of cool. You can make this like a family reading adventure.
Yeah. So they have adult, they have young adult, they have kind of that middle grade like upper chapter book, and then they have the picture books plus the 2 sets of comics. So a lot going on. Yes,
definitely. All right. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That was quite a variety.
Can't say we didn't bring variety. Yeah.
No, this one gets a high marks for variety. Okay, and I think that's all we've got today. And we will be back again next month, I believe. I hope that's right. And if it's not, we'll see you next time on BB Book Buzz. Thanks and goodbye.